Hello, my name is Braden Plush, and I chose to focus on veterans for my final project. The article I chose to read for my final presentation in English 101 is titled A Menu of Options, Resources for Preventing Veteran Suicide in Rural Communities. It was published by the U.S. Educational Publishing Foundation, and the authors include Nathaniel V. Malhat of United States Department of Veterans Affairs, Veterans Health Administration, Rocky Mountain Mental Illness Research, Education and Clinical Center. We also have Melody Bilaria, PTSD Residential Rehabilitation Treatment Program. She also is in the Denver Veterans Affairs Medical Center. And we have Nathan Demers of Grit Digital Health. And we have Lindsay L. Monith and Nazanian H. Beharini, excuse my pronunciation, and they're both in the Rocky Mountain Mental Illness Research Education and Clinical Center. The goal of the article is to find how many resources are available that are tailored for rural veteran and rural veteran populations relative to urban civilization populations. They hypothesized that there would be fewer resources developed for rural populations relative to urban and fewer resources developed for veterans than civil populations. Likewise, they also hypothesized that there would be very limited resources specifically for veterans in rural population. This turned out to be fact, as there are 70 programs in total, only 21 of which are directed towards veterans, and only one of the bunch is in rural areas. Their objective was to create a feasible menu of options for planning a rural veteran suicide prevention program, as well as to identify the areas of need for future research and service development for rural and veteran suicide prevention. They composed a theory on how to accomplish their goal. Their goal was to create a rural veteran suicide prevention program that uses a multi-level public health approach to prevent suicide. Level 1 is crisis intervention. Level 1 will target rural veterans who are at suicide or crisis and find their local agencies. The expected impact of this level of community intervention is to increase awareness and utilization of VHA and community crisis and support systems. Level 2 is enhanced education and training in primary care. Level 2 aims to prevent suicide among rural veterans and providing education on suicide and associated risk factors such as depression and drug addiction to primary caregivers. This will be accomplished by distributing resources and providing training to primary care providers in rural communities. The expected impact of this level of intervention is to increase primary care providers' knowledge and practice regarding suicide risk assessment, mental health screening, and guideline coordinate care for rural veterans at risk for suicide. Level 3 is to train community gatekeepers. Level 3 would be focusing on training rural community members such as citizens and professionals such as clergy, first responders, teachers, and such personnel in recognizing the warning signs of suicide, and they also want to help veterans in need of to access personal care, so the help that they need. The anticipated impact of this level of intervention is to improve the rural community's ability to identify and refer veterans at risk of suicide, thereby increasing access to care. Level 4, the final level, is to raise public awareness. Level 4 aims to prevent suicide by raising public awareness regarding mental health issues and by reducing stigma. This entails conducting a public relations campaign that will be done through making things like posters, advertisements, billboards, and public service announcements within the rural communities to reduce stigma about mental health and increase the acceptability for people who need to be seeking out help. Ultimately, this will change the negative attitudes regarding the acceptance of seeking medical care. The 4-step plan was developed in order to help veterans in rural communities seek out the best resources that were available to them to help with suicide prevention among rural areas. One passage I found interesting was, suicide is one of the top 10 causes of death among all ages groups and is the 10th leading cause of death overall. Despite being preventable, suicide rates have been increasingly steady since 1999. Moreover, the increase in suicides has been growing faster in rural communities, widening a well-documented rural-urban disparity. Suicide rates in rural areas have been consistently getting higher than the urban areas throughout the world. Veterans residing in rural areas experience a 20% higher risk of dying by suicide than veterans who live in urban areas. In my own research, I found out that suicide is the 10th most common death, and there's over 42,000, nearly 43,000 cases of suicide in the United States alone, and that takes 1.3% of deaths in the United States, according to Medical News Today. I also found that suicide numbers per year in rural areas are growing. However, there is a significant rise in the majority groups over the minority groups. Veterans in rural communities experience a 20% higher risk of dying by suicide than veterans in urban areas. That's absolutely insane to me. The resources are absent in low-income areas, and I believe that the 4-level program would help that 20% drop tremendously. Another passage I found interesting was the AFSPP has demonstrated significant reductions in suicide rates, 33% over a 4-year period. Although community-based suicide prevention programs have been successfully implemented for many at-risk populations, to our knowledge, none has been designed or implemented for rural veterans. The AFSPP is the Air Force Suicide Prevention Program, and it aims to reduce stigma, promoting higher seeking, educating the community, and shaping attitudes towards distress and suicide. The program aims their focus on urban areas, which the rural areas are totally left out, and I think this is another flaw and another reason why the rural areas have a greater suicide rate than those in urban areas. A third passage I found interesting was the lack of resources for rural communities highlights how little work has been done to develop interventions and resources targeting the disparity. Also, although many of the resources are in menu of options may translate to rural communities, the effectiveness of these resources have not been established for rural populations. The lack of rural and rural veterans resources places emphasis on the significance of the current project. This passage points out why there needs to be a call of action. The passage alone points out why they're writing the article and why they're proposing that a solution is necessary. A final passage that I found interesting is having the ability to offer communities a menu of options that contain many quality resources enhances communities' capacity to implement effective community-based suicide prevention tailored to local needs and cultures. This passage summarizes why we should accept their solution and their 4-step plan that I see so necessary. As a community member, I believe that it is completely necessary to be more involved in veteran lives. Every life matters, no matter if it's a veteran or your neighbor who you don't like, your boss, none of it matters. Every life matters. I'm a firm believer that life is so short and beautiful. It's a shame when you're not happy, and if an individual wasn't happy in their current state of mind, I feel it is completely necessary to offer them the tools to help them on their path to what one may consider as an equal mind. I believe that everyone should be involved. We're a team in the game of life. We're not on separate teams, and without each other's help, we would be nothing. Humanity wouldn't be able to function. The 4-step solution proposed by the authors of the article is a great place to start with the problem that's already there. We should all be involved in the recovery path of our veterans. After all, they did fight for us.